Hello friends, welcome to today's Facebook Live session, which is a part of the BYJU'S Revise program. So in this program, we are focusing on giving you insights as to how to prepare better for the upcoming CBSE board examinations, which are very few weeks away from now. And we hope that with this session, your preparation is very smooth and you can attempt all the problems that come in the examination with full confidence. Yesterday, we had a session on chemistry. We have given you insights on some of the physical chemistry chapters of 12th standard. Today's session is devoted to maths. So we are looking at 4 chapters of mathematics in today's session. We look at relations and functions. We look at inverse trigonometric functions before moving on to matrices and determinants. Now, in the board examination, because this is the first session, I'm going to tell you the pattern of the paper. Now, we have 4 different sections in the mathematics paper. The first section, section A, has 1-mark questions, and now there are 4 1-mark questions that appear in the examination question paper. Then we move on to section B, which has 2-mark questions. So in 2-mark questions, there will be questions which are called as the short answer type of questions. Then there are 4-mark questions which are called as long answer type of questions, and then the very long answer type of questions, which are the 6-mark questions. So in relations and functions, how are the questions divided? Which are the sections where questions are more frequent, and which are the topics from which questions are very frequent is what I will be telling you in the beginning. But before all this, at the end of today's session, I will be taking a few questions from my viewers. But please keep in mind that since today's session is devoted to relations and functions, inverse trigonometric functions, matrices and determinants, I would appreciate if all the questions are asked from these chapters. I will not have time to answer questions from the further chapters, which I will answer in the subsequent live sessions. Also, I will not have time to solve problems in this particular session. For all of you who have issues with solving certain problems, you can write to us, and here at BYJU'S, we'll help you in solving these problems. But that cannot be done in today's live session. Also, I would advise all of you, expecting all of you to have completed one set of revision by now, to go through the sample papers that are put in our app. All of you can download our app from the link given here and go through your final set of preparation just before the examination. You can go through the summaries of concepts. You can solve a lot of problems. These are available in abundance in our app. So let's look at the first chapter, which is relations and functions. Now, relations and functions is a chapter that I request all of you to understand very well and solve a lot of problems from. Even those students who aren't expecting to score 80 or 90 marks in the examinations should not leave this particular chapter. The reason why I say this is because a sure short 6-mark question is going to appear from relations and functions. Now, this 6-mark question is actually one of the easiest 6-mark question which is going to appear in your paper. And generally, the 6-mark question is going to be from either binary operations or finding the inverse of a function, which has to do with injective functions, surjective functions, and bijective functions. You'll have to prove a function is a bijective function and then find its inverse, and you get 6 marks in your kitty if you do this. So it's very important that you go through this chapter in great detail. I've already told you which are the most important sections in this chapter. The most important sections are binary operations and types of functions, the 1-1 function, the onto function, the 1-1 onto function, or the bijective function, and finding the inverse of functions. Now remember, this is not a competitive examination. This is CBSE board examinations. And in CBSE board examinations, there are marks for steps. So even if you do not reach the final answer, every step of yours is going to give you marks. So please do not skip steps and reach at the conclusion, because steps carry marks. If you reach at the conclusion without steps, the person evaluating a paper will not give you marks. So it's very important that you sit in the CBSE examination with the board exam mindset and not with a competitive exam mindset. Now let me give you an example. Now from binary operations A star B, let it be defined as, let's say, AB by 2. The 6-mark question which comes is you have to show that this binary operation is either commutative or not, associative or not, And then you have to find the identity element, and also you have to find the inverse element. Now, to show that this is a commutative binary operation, you get 1 mark. To show that it's an associative, you get 1 or 2 marks. To show that the identity element exists or doesn't exist, you get 1 or 2 marks. And finally, to show that whether the inverse exists or not, you again get 1 or 2 marks. So this is how you're supposed to solve problems. You have to solve them step by step and very clearly go through all the steps, because these steps will give you marks. So from relations and functions, I am very sure that you will not get a 2 mark or a 4 mark question. But 1 mark questions can sometimes come from relations and functions. Now this is for people who are expecting to score 100 marks. Now these 1 mark questions are the most tricky ones, which will be a problem to students who want 100 marks. To get a centum, you have to answer everything properly, and these 1 mark questions can be very tricky. Now these are going to test your knowledge of each and every concept that is covered in this chapter. So if you want 100 marks, make sure that you know every concept very well, because a twisted, tricky question can come and that will take your 1 mark out and you'll get 99 out of 100. Never be in that position. For students who are expecting to score, let's say 50, 60 marks, you want to pass in the examination. Mathematics is not your cup of tea. You want to leave maths as soon as 12th is done, but then you have to pass in your board examination. Again, relations and functions is a very important chapter, because you're going to get a 6 mark, very simple question. So make sure that you go through this chapter very well, and especially binary operations and invertible functions. These two are very, very important. Of course, I forgot to mention that another important topic from here is a type of relations, whether a relation is an equivalence relation, symmetric, transitive, reflexive. Again, 6 mark questions sometimes come from this, and you know how simple it is to prove whether a relation is a symmetric relation or not, whether it's reflexive or not, whether it's transitive or not. So all these will fetch you a lot of marks. Again, so 3 important topics: binary operations, types of relations, and types of functions, and finding the inverse of a function. So this concludes relations and functions. Then we move on to inverse trigonometric functions. Now, to my students who are trying to pass the examination, who are expecting to score 40-50 marks in the examination, and for whom calculus is a very tricky business, they are not very comfortable doing calculus, I would not suggest to spend a lot of time at this particular point on inverse trigonometric functions, because inverse trigonometric functions fetches just 1 question. It can be a 2 mark question or a 4 mark question. But these questions are generally a little tricky, because in inverse trigonometric functions, the most important concepts are domain and range, solving by substitution, and remembering a few standard formulae. But this is a little tricky to remember, and using the exact substitution at the exact point might become a little tricky. So if you've done a lot of problems so far, and if you're comfortable with inverse trigonometric functions, you can invest a little time here. But if you're not comfortable with inverse trigonometry, and if you feel that, no, I'm not able to do inverse trigonometry, this is not the time to start learning the chapter. With 15 to 16 days to go for your examination, this is definitely not the time to start preparing for inverse trigonometric function. So inverse trigonometric function as such will give you 1 question, either a 2 mark or a 4 mark question. But for students who are really interested in calculus and who can score marks in calculus, inverse trigonometry becomes an important chapter, because calculus questions come from inverse trigonometry, which require knowledge of inverse trigonometry to solve them. You have to put the right substitution for a differentiation problem to make it simple, and then you have to differentiate that. So inverse trigonometry is very important. Now let me give you an example of where students tend to lose mark even if they know inverse trigonometry. Let me give you the example of this problem which appeared a few years ago in the CBSE board exam. Sine inverse of x plus sine inverse of y plus sine inverse of z is 3 pi by 2. They've asked you to find the value of a complicated looking expression, which is x power 101 plus y power 204 plus z power something minus 1 by x power a huge power, y to the power of a big number, z to the power of a big number. Now, people who know how to solve this problem will immediately say that x, y and z are all equal to 1, because the range of sine inverse is minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. So if sine inverse of x plus sine inverse of y plus sine inverse of z is 3 pi by 2, then each of them have to be pi by 2, or x, y, z, and have to be 1. But students forget to mention this in the examination paper. They straight away say that x is equal to 1, y is equal to 1, z is equal to 1. So the expression is 1 plus 1 plus 1 minus 1 is equal to 2. This is not how you solve a CBSE board exam paper. You have to clearly mention this point that the range of sine inverse is minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. Hence, sine inverse of x plus sine inverse of y plus sine inverse of z is equal to 3 pi by 2 implies sine inverse of x is pi by 2, sine inverse of y is pi by 2, and sine inverse of z is pi by 2. Hence, x, y, z is 1, 1, and 1. This is when you will get your 2 marks or your 4 marks. If you don't do this, if you solve it like a competitive examination, your examiner is going to give you a big 0 even if your answer is correct. Please don't get in the entrance examination mode when you are writing the CBSE board examination. This is a very important point because in today's world, when everybody is preparing for competitives, they forget this particular fact. So this is inverse trigonometry. Now we move on to the most important 2 chapters of today's discussion, matrices and determinants. I say this because matrices and determinants normally will fetch 1 6-mark question, 1 4-mark question, 1 2-mark question, 1 1-mark question. So you can understand how relevant this chapter is because you have a question in each section coming from matrices and determinants. So please do not forget to cover matrices and determinants. Those students who are expecting to pass in the examination should go through matrices and determinants because questions in the 2 and 4-mark section from this chapter are extremely simple. They'll give you a matrix A and they'll say find the value of 2a minus a square. You just have to multiply a and then substitute in the equation and get the value. So you get a lot of marks from matrices and determinants for free. At least 6 out of the 13 marks which come from matrices and determinants are very easy to score. Now, properties of determinants will definitely be tested. The 6-mark question from determinants or the 4-mark question from determinants will be on properties of determinants. Another thing which will be definitely tested is solving linear equations using matrix method. Again, a 4-mark question or a 6-mark question can be expected from here. Now, if I were you, properties of determinants can be a little tricky. Sometimes you can get stuck in these problems, and a 6-mark problem on properties of determinants is scary for me. Whereas linear equations are easier to solve. We have a routine method. Of course, finding the adjoint of a matrix, there are more chances that you can go wrong there. But then I would prefer a 6-mark question which is on matrix method to solve linear equations because I can cross-verify the answer very soon. Whereas if it's properties of determinants, if I'm stuck, I don't have a way around it. So I would be happy if I get a 6-mark linear equation question and 4-mark properties of determinant, but then you never know what will happen. So be ready for these things. Now, yet another thing that CBSE has introduced recently are called as value-based questions. So you have these value-based questions. They give you a question wherein a student is given so many points for being honest, so many points for being punctual in class, and then finally they add a point as to what does this imply? What is the relevance of being honest? What is the relevance of being punctual and all these things? So these are value-added questions. But the point is, these are the questions which will be an Achilles heel for students who are aiming to score 100 marks because suddenly a subjective component has been added to maths. Maths, which was all about getting objective, correct answers at the end of it became subjective. Suddenly you have to think about why is disaster management required? Why should we be ethical in exams and all these questions? So be prepared for this, students who are aiming to get 100 marks. Be prepared for such questions because matrices generally have a potential to bring such questions. A linear equation question can easily be converted into a problem which can be a value-based problem. So be prepared for such questions as well. So from matrices, there are certain intricate details which students forget. For example, the relation between the determinant of an adjoint of a matrix and the determinant of the matrix. Now, this is a concept that people are like, oh, I'm not going to use this anywhere. Let me forget it. But again, this is okay for students who are expecting 70, 80 marks because, of course, you don't get a 4-mark or a 6-mark question based on this concept, but you get a 1-mark question. Now, student who wants 100 marks will be stranded at 99 if he does not know the relation between the determinant of the adjoint of a matrix and the determinant of a matrix. So it's very important that you kind of go through all the concepts in great detail if you want 100 marks. Those students who are expecting to just pass in the examination from matrices and determinants, the concepts that I would recommend you to know in great detail would be how to find the inverse of a matrix using matrix method. This is not rocket science. It is very easy. A lot of calculations, but it's very easy and you can if you do it systematically, you can get all your 6 marks very easily, and this is a big bonus in passing the examination. Properties of determinants. Though these are complicated, a 6-mark question, if you start it and you reach some point, you still get marks for the steps. So properties of determinants are also things that you should not forget. And generally these problems are not that complicated that you will not be able to touch them at all. You can reach up to a certain point. So again, properties of determinants can get you at least 3 or 4 marks out of 6 very easily. So don't forget these concepts. And of course, simple operations on matrices, matrix multiplication, addition of matrices, how to find the inverse of a 2 by 2 matrix. All these are things that I expect that even a student who does not like mathematics should be able to do easily. So matrices and relations and functions, these are 2 chapters which are going to fetch almost 20 out of 800 marks, which is 20% of your syllabus. Questions come from these 3 chapters. So if you can do these 3 chapters very well, I expect you to score at least 15 out of 100 from these 2 chapters. So then you have a few freebies coming somewhere else. So scoring 35-40 should not at all be difficult. It should be a walk in the park. And relations and functions and matrices and determinants are going to play a very big role if you want to pass the examination and score 40 or 45 marks. For people who want to score 100 marks, again, these chapters can be troublesome because there are certain concepts which are written in the most corner of the textbook, and you might just oversee these concepts, and suddenly a question pops up from this concept and you've not seen this concept before, and you lose your 1 mark and you lose your chance to score a centum. So for both the extremes, for people who want to just pass, people who want to score 100 marks, these set of chapters are very, very important. You have to go through all the concepts in great detail. Again, for people who want to score 70-80 marks, people who feel that, okay, we cannot attempt the entire paper, somewhere we are bound to go wrong, please don't go wrong in these questions, because these questions are much simpler than calculus questions, where I agree if it's a differential equation question, if it's an application of differentiation question, I agree the chances of going wrong there or not being able to attempt them are higher. But these questions from matrices, from relations and functions, you should be able to attempt them and score marks. So 70 out of, if you want to score 70, you should ensure that in these 4 chapters, you should score 20 out of 20 or 23 out of 23, whatever is the number of marks that are coming from these particular sections. So before we conclude this session and I take I take your questions, there's one thing that I have to tell you, because this is exam season. This is the season of pressure. Now, from all different places, people are going to put a lot of pressure on you. You're going to be asked to study for 12 hours, for 14 hours. You're going to be not allowed to go out of house. You'll have to sit closed in one room and study and all these things. Please make sure that you have enough mental peace. For that, it's very important that you sleep well. Please do not study for 18 hours, 20 hours before the day of the examination. That's not a good practice. On the day of the examination, you shouldn't enter the hall with a clogged mind, which is very heavy because of lack of rest. Please eat good food, because it's important. A healthy mind resides in a healthy body. So you have to keep transpose of a matrix, symmetric and skew symmetric matrices. Again, a very important topic. A difficult topic, which is properties, can be quite tricky. It can be a difficult topic. Sometimes you might be asked to find the inverse of a matrix using row transformations. Now, elementary row transformation is sometimes a pain. So that's a difficult topic. Also, sometimes where people go wrong is they will give an equation. Let's say they give an equation such as a square minus 4a plus 7 is equal to 0, and give a matrix A, and then say, hence, using this particular equation, find the value of the inverse of a matrix. So these are questions where people can go wrong, because if you've been given the equation a square minus 5a plus 7 is equal to 0, and you've solved this you have proved that this equation is true, you are not supposed to find the inverse of this using 1 by determinant multiplied by the adjoint of the matrix, because you can go wrong. You have to pre-multiply or post-multiply this equation by an inverse and find out the value of A inverse. These are again questions where students tend to go wrong. This is also a little difficult for people to keep in their mind. So after this, another question which comes from the chapter on inverse trigonometry is how important is domain and range of inverse trigonometric functions. Now, domain and range of inverse trigonometric function is the heart of that chapter. if you don't know domain and range of inverse trigonometric functions, you do not know inverse trigonometric functions. You cannot solve a problem such as sine inverse of x plus sine inverse of y plus sine inverse of z is equal to 3 pi by 2 if you do not know the range of sine inverse. So the whole chapter on inverse trigonometric functions pivots around domain and range. So make sure you know the concepts of domain and range very well. I'll take one last question, and with that we will conclude today's session. So this last question from the chapter on relations and functions, this student here is asking me how important is the concept of equivalence relation. Now I had forgotten to mention during the session as to how important equivalence relations are. I was just focusing on binary operations, and I was focusing on finding inverse of a function or types of functions. In fact, this question is a very relevant question because relations also fetches 6-mark question. So 6-mark question can come from binary operations or from types of functions or from types of relations. And in fact, if I were a student, I would hope that the question comes from types of relations, because types of relations is very easy to prove. You will be given a relation, you have to prove that the relation is symmetric, or is it reflexive, or is it transitive, and then in the end conclude if it's an equivalence relation. You get 6 marks, 2 marks for proving that it's reflexive, 2 marks for symmetric, 2 marks for transitive, and then in the end saying that it's an equivalence relation gives you, let's say, half a mark. So wherever the division goes, and you will get 6 marks for this question. It's a very easy question. Everybody should know types of relations, and very often this question is also asked. I don't have time to answer more questions. If you have more questions, you can write to us. We will answer your questions. If you have specific problems that you want answers for, you can write to us. The mentor team at BYJU'S will help you with that. And for all those who want a lot of material, can download the BYJU'S app. We have a lot of questions there. The BYJU'S material is very good. It's extensive, a lot of problems available there. You can solve all of them and be well prepared for the examination. See you next week with a few new set of chapters, and then you'll have physics and chemistry sessions as well. Go through all these, revise with BYJU'S sessions, and be well prepared for the examination. Good luck for the examination. I'll see you next week.